In the 90s, Playmates Toys made the deepest line of Star Trek action figures in history. My name's Keith, and I'm a collector working towards owning all 284. I've been a Trek fan for almost 35 years, and most people are sick of me talking about it. But somehow I've convinced my old friend Mike to review them with me on Look at My Star Trek Toys! Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Look at My Star Trek Toys. It's a little show where me and Mike, we talk about my Playmates Star Trek action figures. This week is going to be super fun. This is part one of Crossovers, in which we're going to talk about toys they made about characters from one show crossing over onto another show. It's going to be really fun. Those episodes are always exciting and fun to look at. How's it going, Mike?
It's going great. Always excited to come and look at your toys. The crossover appeals to me because I didn't watch the shows really to begin with, so the crossover-ness isn't as interesting, but if it's anything like last week...
It's really interesting because I'm not interested by it.
Yes, hold on, I'm getting there. Last week, when we saw our Freaks and Geeks, or our One-Hit Weirdos, whatever it was creatively titled, we got to see some cool designs, which were completely unnecessary to know the Star Trek lore. Maybe the crossovers like that?
Unlikely.
Well, I'm here. I'm ready. Beam me up.
Okay, well, let's just hop right into it with one of the most iconic crossovers in Star Trek history. We are going to hop to figure number 6027. Who is it? It's Spock! This is Admiral Spock on The Next Generation, Season 5, Episode 8, Reunification, Part 2. What do you think's going on here with Spock?
He's lacking hands in the episode, it seems.
He's not. They're just behind his back. But I'd be curious why he doesn't have hands in your imagination.
Oh, I was wondering if his hands popped out on the figure. Maybe it was like a thing for this episode. There does appear to be two of them. I always think that Spock action figures, and maybe it's because it's so iconic, they always do have a pretty good... Well, he's so synonymous with Vulcans that it's one and the same, but they always look just like them. You know, it's like, there's Leonard Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy?
Yes. I'm finding Leonard Nimoy.
Where did you find that?
Yeah. He's staring right at us. The design is a little bizarre. The shoulder pads are pretty ever present, very big. He's got the like rando. We didn't have time to design legs boots on. But that said, it's a Spock action figure, and I imagine that whatever outfit you threw a Spock in probably sold pretty damn well.
Yeah, well, what he's wearing here from the episode Reunification is he's wearing Romulan civilian clothes, hence the ridiculous box shoulders and why it looks like they stuffed a couch and he wore it. So he's actually sort of flying under the radar on Romulus, trying to reunify the Vulcans and the Romulans, and it's a whole two-part episode, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it's Leonard Nimoy reprising his role as Admiral Spock at this point. But it's an interesting crossover for him because obviously he was there in the original series and the original series movies, and then came over to Next Generation. But why? But why did Leonard Nimoy come over to the Next Generation? Well, because this was the same month that Star Trek 6 was going to come out. So this crossover was a promotion for Star Trek 6. And so as a result, Leonard Nimoy actually did the episode for SAG scale because it was an ad for the movie, and Leonard Nimoy negotiated a percentage of the profits of Star Trek 6, so he was very invested in getting folks to the theaters. I believe Star Trek 6 was the first Star Trek movie I saw in the theaters. Other interesting things about this episode, sadly, this episode featured a card before memorializing the death of Gene Roddenberry, who died right before this episode was aired. So it certainly was an important episode of Star Trek. So you had You had Spock and Picard chatting and hanging out with Data. So that was a really fascinating thing and a very surprising. I mean, we knew it was coming, but at the end of part 1, he just shows up and you found him, and it was really kind of cool. I notice here on the figure, the one criticism I would have of this figure, beyond the basic design of the costume design was just kind of bland, is that in the episode you can see that Leonard Nimoy or Spock is graying at the temples, and yet the figure still has the full jet black Vulcan hair. And I imagine that's because they just took the head from a different figure. But now, going back, I don't think they made an official movie era Spock, so they would have the older facial structure. I don't know. I got questions, Playmates. I've got questions.
Also, the shoulder pads make they give him only the one arm articulation there, because I believe the other many of the other figures have better kind of shoulder articulation.
No, he actually does. He has the full articulation. He can turn his arms backwards and forwards and up and down.
Oh, okay.
But it creates that big seam there that wasn't there. But, obviously there weren't big round holes in his elbows either. So you'd have to roll with it. It's an action figure.
Yeah, fair.
So while we're talking about original series legends showing up on the Next Generation, let's hop to figure 6028. Dr. McCoy on the Next Generation. Dr. McCoy? We really shouldn't have McCoy beam in. McCoy frequently refused to use the transporter. In fact, he talks about it on this episode of the Next Generation. So what do you think's going on with McCoy?
What I think's going on is that they were planning a Star Trek line, a Back to the Future line. And we saw Doc Brown. We saw Doc Brown from the last episode in our One Hit Weirdos, and this is clearly Biff from Back to the Future 2. Looks just like Old Man Biff.
Yes, it totally does.
But that said, the Hot Topic pants are working for me. The Mr. Rogers sweater, so much better than the old man. What's his doohickey from the last episode?
Oh, yes, Dr. Soong.
Yeah, like this zip-up kind of this whole costume design absolutely works for me. I think the face is actually a really good likeness of this character. This is a cool figure. One of my favorite old man figures we've seen.
Yeah, it's an interesting old man figure. And of course, it's played by DeForest Kelley, who played Dr. McCoy in the original series and the movies. Was that this is from the pilot of the Next Generation, and they added this at the last second to try to give some fan service tie in with the original series. And actually, similar to Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley did his appearance for Scale as well. And SAG Scale, if you don't know, is sort of the minimum. SAG is the Screen Actors Guild, is the union, and they have a minimum amount that you can be paid to be in an episode. And clearly, if you're DeForest Kelley, you could have asked for a great deal of money to be on Next Gen, but he did it for the minimum. And he's I think he's 115, supposed to be in canon in the series there, but they put a whole mess of old man makeup onto DeForest Kelley, who was at this point still doing the movies. I think this was around the era of Star Trek V. So he had to play older than he was on the series.
How come they live so long in the future? Because of health, medicine and stuff?
I think it's Obamacare.
Yeah, well,
I think it's it's 300 years of healthcare. Plus, he's the doctor. He's gonna get all the good stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of good stuff, let us hop forward. And he's not going to need to beam either, because he sort of apparates wherever he goes. Let's go to 6247. It is our first appearance on our show of Q.
Well,
and this,
since he doesn't beam, Keith, I want to be fair to the lore.
Okay. All right.
So let's just do it the right way.
Okay. Oh, there he is. He's just crossfading. And this, of course, is Q from Deep Space Nine Series 2 for his one appearance on Deep Space Nine. What do you know about Q? Do you know anything about Q, Mike?
I know that what we did when we talked about him on our other show, Out of Practice podcast, which is about David E. Kelly's show, The Practice, but it's also about Keith and I slowly devolving into crazy old men. You should check it out on the KME YouTube empire, which you can do by just clicking on our little profile here and look at our other videos. That said,
cross promotion.
I know that when I've seen him before, he's had cooler costumes than just the standard Starfleet uniform here. So I think he sometimes is in like a bucket. He like takes different forms, right? He's like a. Does that confuse him? Is he not in the soup bucket? Oh, I broke you.
Oh my God! So many Star Trek fans just, had
Different
some
guy?
sort of a physical reaction to that.
Different guy?
Confusing Q with Ono. And confusing John Delancey.
Is that no? I'm now confusing the other guy with Orko from He-Man. They're all being confused. So
Yes, John Delancey and Renee Aubergenois are not the
isn't
same
Q's
people.
like the super bad guy?
He is
Data's nemesis or Picard, one of those guys.
He's sort of a nemesis. He is ambiguous in terms of his good guy or bad guy-ness, and he sort of functions either way. But he's more of a puckish, impish character that is always causing trouble. He did, however, get us involved with the Borg, so that wasn't great.
Okay.
So he is an omnipotent character. He's always popping in and out and changing reality and wearing different costumes. He's not in Starfleet. He wears the Starfleet uniform matching whoever he's bothering to bother that person. So it's a really fun character who will be back in Star Trek Picard Season 2. So get ready. But this is him in this uniform. Q only made one appearance on Deep Space Nine. He made several more on Voyager and a whole mess of different ones on Next Generation. And in fact, Delancey ended up having 4 figures in the Playmates line. So we're going to see him eventually in the Next Generation captain's uniform, matching Picard. This one, he also, in the pilot and the series finale, wears this big, intense judge outfit, and he plays a French admiral in his 6-inch figure. We'll do the 6 inches, don't worry. But here's the fun part. If we hop over to Toy Cam, let's see his choking hazards.
Oh yeah, gotta see him. Accoutrement.
Here it is. This is the John Delancey figure from the original Deep Space Nine line. And so what do we have here? Well, first off, we have another Pog. So they were really big with the Pogs at that point. And in his choking hazards, here he does have a phaser. He has a pad. And he has right here, that is a Bajoran orb, which I don't know exactly why he has that. But that those play a big role on Deep Space Nine. But I don't think he actually ever has any interaction with them. But they weren't sure what choking hazards to put with our good friend Q.
I'll say here, I would actually love to talk to somebody. Maybe we'll see how the show goes, but who works in this field, because what I think is really cool here is that, look, at the end of the day, this is a pretty boring action figure. When we're just looking at the action figure itself, if I swap back real quick, it's pretty boring. I mean, it sort of looks like John Delancey, but not really. It could just be like a generic guy who works on Star Trek ship. You know what I mean? However, that said, if we go back to Toy Cam, if you could pop it back up there, the box design, the general artistic design of this entire package here is stellar. It's interesting, yet not too busy. It's cohesive. It's super cool. It's a strong argument for, I want to keep this in the box, because the whole kind of package here is really cool looking. And then even the back of the package, like, kudos to the art team at Playmates for this design, because it's super, super cool, informative. I want to keep the cardboard stock because it's got cool stuff on it. It's just an interesting. It's like whoever the artistic director of the entire packaging is a pat on the back because
I agree with you. This is the Deep Space Nine Series 2. And I think what I like about it from a graphic designer standpoint is the base being black. And we're seeing the stars, and that really makes everything on it pop. And I think that's really cool. And and Deep Space Nine, the station itself, just looks totally badass on black in this setup. And I think in terms of the boringness of the figure itself, I totally get it from a standpoint of not being a Trek fan. And you're looking at it in terms of like how weird and interesting and cool is this figure. But for us Trek nerds, the fact that it is exactly because we know Q and because we know all the stories and capabilities of Q, it's actually not boring at all. It's really exciting because Q can literally do anything and be anywhere, and we've imprinted on these uniforms so much, especially if you were a fan as a kid like I was. These uniforms, like, they are the epitome of cool, and I want that, and I love lining them up, and they're matching, and so it is interesting that it is boring from an objective, an outsider's point of view. When I'm like, oh man, it's so cool, I love that uniform. It is interesting that when you're having the same character in a different uniform, to save money, Playmates will mix and match. So the body they've probably used on other figures, and the John Delancey head is probably the same head from the next gen version of the toy. So it's also, that one's a really cheap one to put together because you have generic male red uniform and Pop on the other head. There's not much design that you have to do, and yet people like me are still going to want it. All right, so speaking of things that we're going to want, we're going to get into our next two. Our last two are going to be from a really special, cool crossover. And that is, we're going to start with 65110 Dr. Julian Bashir wearing the original series outfit. And so here is Dr. Bashir, played by Alexander Siddig. So how do you think he ended up in an original series outfit?
We must be going into a really cool time travel episode.
You are right.
Woo.
This is quite it's certainly in my top 5 favorite episodes of Star Trek of all time.
It's cool already. Just looking at the screenshot, how authentic they tried to be to the kind of the design, the way the camera is shot, everything.
Well, hold on to your hat, because this episode, Deep Space Nine, Season 5, Episode 6, Trials and Tribulations, was indeed a time travel episode that put our Deep Space Nine cast back into the era of the original series. But not only did they put them back into the era, they put them into the episode.
Oh, that's cool.
They went back to the episode The Trouble with Tribbles, the original series, which was one of the most famous great episodes of the original series, and they not only put them in the outfit and went back to that time frame, they edited them into the original footage of the episode. And so while this classic episode is happening around us, we're now seeing this behind the scenes second storyline with time travel, where our heroes from Deep Space Nine are there interacting with Kirk. They're interacting with McCoy and Spock right there on the screen, and it looks photorealistic with the CGI that they were able to do. And it's so cool.
That's really cool. Really cool.
It's very, very cool. And it looks amazing. And of course, this was back in the 90s. So, their ability to digitally place people in was really remarkable what they were able to do. They also brought back the actor Charlie Brill, who played Arnie Darvin in the original episode, and had him come back in Deep Space Nine 25, 30 years later and play the same character, and of course all the hijinks going around, and incorporating them into this classic episode. It was just so cool. It's just a great episode of both
I'm gonna
series.
have to check that one out.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to watch all of Deep Space Nine.
All right.
You're really gonna like it. I promise. It's really awesome. And while we're talking about it, let's hop over to the next one, 62107, and see our captain now, Benjamin Sisko. And both of these figures were Warp Factor 1. And so Sisko, in his original series uniform there, in case you didn't know, Mike, which I'm assuming you don't, and they actually referenced it in the episode.
We got the cool mustache now, right?
Yeah, he has the goatee and he's bald. So he's like, we are now like in peak badass Sisko. It's so cool. But you'll note that he's in a command division, which on his series and Next Generation is red. But in the original series, it was yellow, which is why you see Kirk in yellow as opposed to red like Picard. Oh. So they actually switched the red and gold.
Attention to detail.
And attention to detail. Well, it was the reason they switched from yellow to red for Next Generation is Patrick Stewart didn't look good in yellow. Oh. So they're like, let's make it
you're proving
let's make it red.
Case in point.
Yeah, well, here I'm in my Boston Bruins yellow. That's right. So it's really, again, really fun. There's a moment where Sisko talks to Kirk, and this isn't like, Kirk from, older Kirk, you know what I mean? This was like full-on original Kirk, and it's really, really cool. So this episode was so popular that Playmates made 6 different figures commemorating this one episode.
Oh, wow.
Which we will get to in Crossovers Part 2 whenever we decide to do that. But, Mike, how was your journey through all the crossovers?
Keith, I really felt that I am now much more versed on all things Star Trek. I feel like I'm officially welcomed into the family now, even, some would say.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot there to go. And I just grabbed... It's so interesting because there's so many layers in Star Trek and in the figures and all of this. It's what's weird is how much of this how much information is in my brain. Like, I barely remember your name, but I can tell you like what episode this will be in Crossovers Part 2, folks.
Let me ask you this.
Episode.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Because the umbrella of Star Trek has encapsulates so many different things, right? You've got movies, you've got various series. Does the fandom compete as in, are there people who are just fans of one series, or is it generally speaking, you kind of join into the entire ecosystem?
That's a really good question. And I think what I would say, I will speak to my own experience, that fans of Star Trek kind of imprint on the era in which they became fans. So for me, I became a fan in the 80s and 90s. So, which is why I like this series of Playmates. So it's Next Gen, it's DS9, it's Voyager. Those were my core times, which I imprinted on the show. And I like everything else. I like the original series. I like Enterprise and the new stuff. But what Star Trek fans also do is they hate change. So the people who were the original series, when Next Gen came out, they hated Next Generation. And people just absolutely hated it. And now, of course, with the next generation of them, with Discovery and Picard and all the new shows coming up,
Below Deck, the animated one,
the Lower Decks, and we'll have Section 31 coming. Lots of stuff happening. So now people my age who imprinted on the 90s era are like, this is different. I don't like this. This isn't Star Trek. And the same thing that the original series people said about Next Gen. This isn't Star Trek. What is this? And so yes, I am a fan of all of it, and I think if you're a Trek fan, you're on board because Trek is about a world view and an optimistic view of the future and a way of interacting more than just pew pew and aliens. So you're going to be invested in all of it. But do I have my favorites? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 80s and 90s era is where my heart is and always will be.
And then last, since we just have an extra minute, so I'll ask you this other question I've been thinking about, especially since we're playing with your toys. Does Playmates still own the license, and are they still making toys?
They do not own the license currently. The license has actually hopped around to a whole bunch of different companies. It was Galoob before this, and it was Diamond Select afterwards. And so right now it's a little bit all over the place. There are licenses for like the super high-end figures, and then you have the more commercial figures. You know, all the Discovery ones are coming out now. And you see, kind of after Playmates, the companies that came in and did super high-end versions of all of these same figures. But they, like the Diamond Select, they're just much nicer, bigger, more detailed figures. But they don't make nearly as many of them. So they might do 15 or 20 or 30 as opposed to 300. And so that's why I like the Playmates figures. So, I can afford them. They're cheap still for the most part. But because like I want the one-hit weirdos, and I want the crossover commemoration, and I don't want to have 15. I want to have 1,500 because I'm that type of a dork.
Well, listen, if you're that type of a dork, you can help us out by getting us more views, and it's easy to do that. Hit the like button, hit the bell icon, subscribe, do the things that the kids tell you to do. And if you know anybody who worked at Playmates or happened to work on any of these toys, I think we'd like to maybe talk with them if they're interested. Just see what kind of goes into the kind of cohesive design of the figures, the box art, all the stuff. How was the sausage made? Let us know. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking into the void. I'm just along for the ride. My buddy Keith here is a wealth of information. You can always chat with us with questions, comments, or concerns. Keith, what am I forgetting?
You can email us at lookatmystartrektoys@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram because we're posting a lot of this fun stuff just at Star Trek Toys. But we will see you next week with more of my fun toys. We'll see you then.
Look at my Star Trek toys!